Hi, thank you for joining us. I'm Rory Bishop, Alamance Visual Arts Director, and I'm honored to introduce these two artists, Ahmed and Sia. Sia is our current exhibiting artist, and he's a freelance photographer. And Ahmed is also an artist, a journalist, and a professor of communications at Elon. He was born in Iraq, and he's led discussions on topics ranging from art's importance as a form of expression to the economic and social changes which can impact work of artists. I personally think that these two converge on the purpose for creating the artwork that they do, and I look forward to learning more about their artistic journey. I'm so honored that you would choose to spend your time here with us at Alamance Arts, and because of your wonderful donations and contributions, we're able to make things like this possible. So thank you so much for joining us this evening. Without further ado, I'll turn this over to the artists. They're going to introduce themselves and their work, and then we'll dive into a series of questions that I prepared for us to look over. I hope you enjoy.
So I was born in Iraq in 1967, and I joined the art school in the 80s. I became a sculptor. I got my master's degree, my PhD in fine arts, and I was teaching in the art school in Baghdad until 2003. This is when the invasion happened. And because of the looting that happened, just like every other government building around the country, my school was burned and looted, so I literally lost my job. So I started using my English to work as an interpreter for Western media. And before I know it, I started taking photographs, I started reporting, and then my boss at AFP, which is Agence France Presse, he noticed that I have a passion for videography. So he sent me to a trip to Paris where I got my training, and I came back and I started my video desk in Baghdad. And now I'm using my lens instead of my chisel to find beauty around me. After several death threats, I had to move out of AFP. I joined the New York Times in Baghdad. I became their newsroom supervisor for about 2 years until I got my second death threat. Starting 2006, a friend of mine who lives in Chapel Hill, and he had a radio show called The Story, Dick Gordon, he emailed me and asked me if I can write audio stories for his show. And I never wrote a story before, not even in Arabic, so this was a big challenge for me. But surprisingly, it was accepted by the people, and they started asking for more to learn about Ahmed and his family who are living in a war zone. These were known as Ahmed's diaries for a while. So in late 2007, when I got my second death threat, Dick Gordon worked on bringing me here to the United States as a visiting scholar at UNC Chapel Hill, since I have a PhD and I can teach. And this is where I was introduced to Elon University. I was invited by some of the professors who listened to my stories on the radio to come and talk about my experience to their students and about life there and about the reality of war that they never heard of or experienced through the media. 2009, I went back to Damascus. This is where my family was waiting for me. Took them back to Baghdad. This time I joined the Times of London and then Al Jazeera English. Until one day I got an email from Elon University inviting me to come here as a full-time professor. And I accepted the invitation, and we moved here to Burlington, North Carolina in 2012. And this is my 10th year working for and teaching at Elon.
Wow.
My path is a little bit different. It seems like it's come full circle, and there's some similarities and quite a bit different. But obviously, we're from neighbor countries. I was born a few years after you, not that many years, 1971. And I was born and raised in Iran, but I traveled a lot. My father was a diplomat for quite a while, so we were in Spain and Nigeria and Pakistan. So growing up, I was exposed to a lot of different cultures. And when we came to the United States, I came here as a teenager, and it was in the middle of the Iran-Iraq war. So back home, a lot of the Iranians that are here now came right after the revolution, or they came here before the war. Our case was unique that we came when we were, at the peak of the conflict, because my father felt that the best chance for us to have a better education, a better life, would be to get his sons out of there. And it inadvertently split up the family because my mom had to stay behind to take care of something, so we were here with my father, and there was some strains on him and on her, and then of course on the children, me and my younger brother. And one thing led to another. We ended up in possibly, I don't know if it's the most American or the least American of states, is Oklahoma. So there was not much going on because I had all these preconceived notions of what the United States was going to be. I knew Los Angeles and Hollywood and New York and the Statue of Liberty, and my dad, we were in Spain waiting to get our visas, and he said it's been approved and we're going to the States. And I said, where are we going? He said, we're going to Broken Arrow, Oklahoma. And I said, where's that? And he opened up, it's called the Encyclopedia Britannica. It's our version of the Encyclopedia Britannica. It's only 8 volumes though. And he opened it up, he's like, found the United States, like he found Oklahoma. He's like, okay, you see this little dot that says Tulsa? It's like, he's like, it's outside of that. So we came here, and it was just culture shock because I'd been in Iran, but then I'd been in Madrid, Spain, and I come to a place where people were set in their ways. It's 90% plus Republican, and so it was culture shock for me. I skipped a grade. I went from 8th grade to 10th grade, so I didn't fit in with the kids, and there's the cliques and the bullying and everything else. But you kind of learn in a rough and tumble way how what you have to do to get ahead. Life wasn't so bad, but you still had to figure out the streets and the school life and the home life by yourself because your father was off at work. It was now a single parent household where I'd been used to having 2 parents around all my life. After that, and different paths that life took, I always had, when I was going to school and when I was out of school, I relied on some restaurant jobs and everything as a background, but that led into later me pursuing a career in wine. So as far as you can be from what I'm doing now, but my focus was wine. So for about 15-20 years I was a sommelier, and the 10 years or so that I resided in North Carolina, where I called my home, prior to kind of having one foot here and one foot on the other side of the world. Between 2007 and 2017, I was working for the same company and handling most of their wine pairings and everything else. Somewhere around 2016, I started feeling like I was stagnant, and I was comfortable financially. I was comfortable, I love my friends, and my friends are my family here, as I had no family here. My father had gone back to Iran, and my brother, he lives in upstate New York. He's a scientist, and so we see each other. We talk often, but we see each other rarely. As life moves on and everything, and I just felt like there was something missing. I felt stagnant, and I felt like I wasn't having any growth. And so I kind of uprooted and got rid of pretty much all material things that I had. I gave away a lifetime's worth of furniture and electronics and things like that. I kind of got rid of everything and kind of gave it all away, and whittled everything down to a storage unit 5x5 the size of a closet, and put what I want to take in 2 suitcases and move back to Iran to reconnect, or to connect, rather, in some cases, with the fabric of my country and the culture and traditions that I either had forgotten or had never learned in the first place. Being the oldest of 10 grandkids, it was important to me to see my grandparents a lot. They were in their earlier 90s then, and my grandfather, who actually just passed away a couple months ago, he passed away at age 100. So, one good thing about moving back, one good thing about moving back was to, reconnect with him, because it's a living history, 2 people that are almost 100 years old, And so my stepfather, separate from this, again, it's not all death over there, but he also passed away shortly before I went back to Iran. He and I shared a birthday. And so I had always been an avid photographer, but a hobbyist. I had done some darkroom stuff, and I had, studied photography, but I had not gone to school for it formally. So at best I was a hobbyist, and I was enjoying the process of it and everything. And of course, Iran is ripe with subject matter for photography. So I would talk to my stepfather about my Parsa, and we shared a birthday. So we would always talk on our birthday, and we were very close in that way and everything. I had made the plans to move back to Iran. He passed all the way all of a sudden, no long illness or anything, just passed away peacefully. And so I never got to meet him, embrace him and everything. But when I went back there, it was a continuation of some of his work. I was seeing everything that he had done through his lens. He has over 25 books in print, very famous books of photography, a bunch of good black and white work. I wouldn't equate it to somebody like Ansel Adams who did American Landscapes, but in Iran he's very well renowned for his use of color and his use of exposure and light, you know. And so I wanted to experience those scenes but capture them through my lens. And that put me basically on the path that I am, that's brought me to where we are today, which is after traveling around Iran and experienced that for a year and a half, I came back in early 2019 and had a small exhibition, and that led to larger and more involved exhibitions throughout 2019. The idea was to go back at the end of 2019, return in 2020 with, you know, a bit more finesse in my technique, better subject matter, exploring the people of the places that I had photographed, because my first set of exhibitions focused on the spaces in Iran more so than the people that inhabit those places and use them from their day-to-day lives. So, of course, there were some problems over there, and then, of course, the president here in early 2020 decided to kill the second in command of the Iranian military. So there was some difficulties traveling back. And then, you know, so my trip kept getting canceled. And then the third time, you know, the old adage of third time the charm, I booked another ticket to go to Iran for the Persian New Year, which is in late March, coming up in a week here. And COVID had hit, but COVID had hit there, not here. So my parents called me and said, again, cancel your ticket. So I got stuck in the States, you know, no source of income, because, you know, when you're an emerging or up and coming or whatever, when you're at the beginning of a trajectory in any visual art form, what drives any growth for you, a big part of it at least, is exposure, which is in galleries and talks such as this and other things. So there was nothing going on. So as soon as I could leave the United States, which was August of 2020, I threw caution to the wind and went back to Iran and started traveling all around the country. And I spent that year documenting a few occasions that I was kind of blessed to be the only photographer in certain places. So for good or for bad, there was nobody traveling. So I was, you know, taking the only pictures of the saffron artists in 2020, or the only pictures of the underground fabric weaving workshops in Kashan, or the only photos of the fishermen in the Caspian Sea with the traditional net fishing methods, you know. And that provided the basis of exhibitions when I came back in 2021. Now vaccinated and a bit more prepared again, I decided to do the same thing. Latter half of 2021 I spent in Iran, but this time, despite the fact that I intended on traveling to other regions in Iran, in the northwestern stretches of the country, close to the border in Iraq, where there's some churches, as you know, I was intending on photographing those around Tabriz and Azerbaijan. Every time I would go to the airport and I went to fly there, I was like, man, it's cold there, you know, and I'd gone to this one small island in the Persian Gulf for a few days, and it just mesmerized me. I kept canceling my ticket and going back to the Gulf region, canceling another ticket and going back to the Gulf region. Hence the name of this exhibition, Accidental Traveler, because it wasn't intentional to do this. The focus was going to be something else. And matter of fact, at the time that I'd spoken with Ms. Bishop, and we had, you know, laid the groundwork of this exhibition, and the contract was already set. It was on the basis of photographs that had not been taken. So she had a measure of faith in me that I was like, well, what's going to be in this show? I don't know. This is on the basis of your previous body of work, but we don't know what's going to be in this show. So it shifted. The name shifted, the focus shifted, the subject matter shifted, and here we are.
Wow, what a journey.
The journey has been long and far. You know, something that stood out for me in both of your stories is that, you know, you had, you named specifically culture shock, but you've moved to somewhere that isn't seen on movies and TV.
Well, culture shock is culture shock, so I had it as well. But for me, when I left Iraq in 2009, the first time, 2008 actually, heading to the United States, there were, I know a lot about the United States, thanks to Hollywood and the news, the media. But I had these doubts when I was on the airplane, just about to land at JFK, about how the people are going to receive me. Because back then the insurgency in Iraq was at its height, and you know, the fighting was still going on, and I was thinking to myself, well, I'm an Arab, Muslim, an Iraqi, and a Sunni. That's basically the combination of an insurgent or a terrorist. So how are people going to receive me? I don't know. So when I landed at JFK, here's the surprise. the officer at the immigration office, he said, is this your first visit to the United States? And I said, yes. And he said, since you're from the Middle East, you have to go to that shack over there. There's an officer who speaks Arabic. And I said, I can speak English. And he said, it doesn't matter, you have to go there. So I went there, and there was an officer sitting behind the desk. He had a beard, and I said, Salam alaikum. He said, alaikum salam. And from his accent, I think that he was either Lebanese or Jordanian. And I said, I'm your brother Ahmed, I'm from Iraq, I just arrived, and here's my passport, and I have another plane to catch in 2 hours. And he said, okay. He took my passport and asked me to sit. And I kept sitting and sitting and sitting, and then a bunch of people came in and out, and he did their passports for them. He gave them the stamp. And it was like 45 minutes, and I went back to him and I said, sir, I have another plane to catch. And he said, I know, go back to your seat. So I went back to my seat, and after an hour, I went back to him and I said, sir, I already missed my plane. And he said, you can catch the other. Go back to your seat. And then maybe 20 minutes later, he came out of his seat, he took his jacket, and he said, I'm off for the day. And he left.
Wow. I'm sorry.
And I was just sitting there.
Sorry, audacity.
And then an American officer came to the same desk, and he saw a passport on the desk, and he read Iraq Republic, and name is Ahmed, and he saw the picture, and he saw me sitting, and he came to me and said in Arabic, Ahlan wa sahlan fi America, welcome to America. And I said, you speak Arabic? And he said, no, but I was raised in Saudi Arabia, and these are some of the words that I remember. And I told him about the other officer, and he said, what's going on? And he said, I don't know. He said, come with me. He came back to the desk, gave me the stamp, and he said, you're ready to go. And that's it. So this was one of the shocks that I had when I came to the United States. People everywhere, and after I introduced myself as Ahmed from Iraq, they would say, oh, we're sorry about what happened to your country. We were opposed to war from day one, but this was the government decision, and so on and so on. And we start sharing stories and ask questions. I ask them about their culture. They ask me about the country and so on. And it was great, actually. And from there, I just discovered that it's not the people, it's the politicians, basically. It was Saddam Hussein and Bush, but it wasn't the American people and the Iraqi people.
Yeah.
Right.
Basically, it was the same.
I love that you said that, because I think for me that ties in with what Sia is trying to convey, at least in my perspective. What you're trying to convey with your work is that we have these preconceived notions of things, and when you see the day-to-day, the humanness of people, that those are two different things that we can relate in some ways, which is beyond our capacity, what we've seen or have been told.
Actually, this is one of the lessons that I've learned in my life, the best lessons that I've learned from my life. Like, for example, Sia just mentioned the Iraq-Iran war. This lasted for about 8 years. Over 1 million soldiers got killed. And it destroyed the infrastructure of both countries. But here we are, he's Iranian, I'm Iraqi, we're sitting together, we're having a chat, we're having a good time. So it's not us, the people, who are the problem. It's the politicians, it's the leaders, basically. We are just the fuel for war. We get killed, they get the glory. That's it.
The people that start the wars never bear the brunt of the effects of those wars.
Yeah.
Their children are not the ones fighting on the front lines. Their livelihood is not hurt. It's a lot easier to make decisions from the comfort of your own home, or even knowing what's going to happen to other people. Because in certain cases, some people make decisions because they don't know what's going to happen to other people. But in the case of evil men, they make decisions full well knowing what's going to happen. Look at what the world's doing today,
And they
know what's going to
they're
happen.
protected. They know that nothing is going to happen to them or their
You
family.
have to
It's
shut
just
up
the
part
other
of your
people.
humanity to do that. So.
Well, so one of the things that I saw when we first came in and when Sia and I were curating the show was, like, for me, the unexpectedness of the portrait of the folks in motorcycle garb or gang motorcycle garb, and they have like their whole array of motorcycles around them. And it was kind of unexpected for me because I didn't think of that area that way. And so that was a reflection of Western culture within your culture, Sia. And so I was wondering what other ways, maybe for good or for bad, does that show up?
You know, there's a. I think that's multifaceted, but the short answer I think is there's a lot more homogeneity in a lot of cultures, and political and geographical borders have basically vanished in a certain sense, especially since the advent of pieces of technology like the internet or having the world at your disposal in your pocket. Because when you look at the equivalent of millennials that you guys have here, our calendar is different. We were actually addressing this outside. It's the year 1400 right now in Iran. So the kids born in the 60s and 70s there, which will be the same as y'all's millennials here. Those are the people that exert change, and when they've been exposed to other things, people of other cultures want to see certain things. Even in fashion, you see that the traditional chefia, which Yasser Arafat at Palestine, and the other popular in black and white scarf. Exactly. So those, you see worn as a fashion item now. Well, where did that come from? Or when you see the kids that you were speaking of that have Harley Davidson and Jack Daniels shirts, they're emulating something that they find, ubiquitous with other culture, but taking it and making it their own, giving their group name the Cataphracts, named after the Persian military armored divisions 2,500 years ago. But I think as the world, is more connected, it's harder to keep things hidden, and it's easier to share things for good or for bad. So,
culture in the Middle East, and most of it is tight. They don't accept anything new, especially coming from the West. So for a long time, and especially before the internet, these cultures remained as they are. Same traditions, same norms, same ways, for decades, maybe for hundreds of years. But when the internet was introduced, and this is when the younger generation started being able to learn about the outside world, this is when the influence started coming. It's just like here in the United States. If you show any kid an audio cassette, for example, they would keep wondering what this is. That doesn't make any sense to them, because they grew up with CDs and then with streaming and iPods and stuff. So it's the same thing with the Middle East. Most of the kids today know more about the West and about the new technology than about their ancient culture. Whatever their parents or others pass to them, the elders especially, this is what they know, but you can't just pass an entire culture to a person. They have to learn it from other places, like from friends or from school or from places that they visit. And this is slowing down, and the internet is taken over. Even in countries like in Saudi Arabia, where it's ruled by Sharia law, just like in Iran, the Sharia law is the base of the constitution, right?
It's a theocratic, it's a theocracy, so the Quran is used as the basis, as like a constitution in essence.
Exactly, so it's all based on the Quran, it's all based on what is known as the Sunnah, which are the teachings of the Prophet Muhammad. Even in Saudi Arabia today, there are some changes happening, and this is because people now can easily learn about what's happening outside the borders and maybe adopt some of this culture to them.
So could I sum up maybe what it sounds like to me, both of what you were saying, is that with the access to the internet and things that are different outside of what you already knew and what was immediately around you, whether it's culture or elders, you have more possibilities and more potential. So there's growth.
There is, but it's a double-edged sword. I was mentioning that there's a good and a bad. It made me think of it when you were touching on, not knowing enough about your own culture and everything else. So for myself, and albeit at a bit older age, going back and reacquainting myself, well, I have an interest in what I'm doing. And I'm not saying younger kids don't, because I don't want to generalize. But I'll give you two specific instances. One of them is in one of the photographs here, and one of them is in another journey that is not displayed here. One of the first places I went to in Iran is a city called Yazd. Okay, Yazd is one of the birthplaces of Zoroastrianism, which was the first monotheistic faith in the world. So There are these beautiful excarnation plateaus outside of the city where the bodies would be stripped naked, taken to these mountaintops, and vultures would clean the flesh off of them. It's a beautiful city. There's a lot of history and tradition. So you're talking about thousands of years that this civilization, this part of Iranian civilization, has been continuously active. Now, there's a very famous bazaar there, and we call Bazar Mescara as the copper workers bazaar. And years ago, this is where copper pots and copper trays and everything are made by hand. And years ago, you would hear the bazaar before you saw the bazaar, because you hear the clanging of the hammer. The bazaar is now silent because the newer generation doesn't want to follow in the father's footsteps and do that, make that. Why? I want to go to town, I want to have a BMW, I want to be in a big city, I want all these other things.
And why make something since you can bring it from China?
Absolutely, absolutely. And, you can, and even in bazaars now, and not just in that part of that bazaar, but because those wares are sold everywhere else. So in Bakhil Bazaar Shiraz or the Grand Bazaar Tehran, there's copper pots sold, and you can just tell by the hammer marks how even they are, that these are machine made, even if the bazaari, the salesman tells you that they're made by hand. The second example I was going to tell you about is there's a photo of a weaver, an old man behind a loom. Well, the loom itself is older than the old man. The guy's about 75 years old, Ahmed Fadaam. Same namesake. He's been there since he was 10 years old in this workshop. And he has one glass eye. He just had open heart surgery, and his son just passed away because I've visited him every year that I've gone there. I visit him.
Wow.
And so, he's who they call the last of 32. There were 32 of these masters. He's the last one practicing this art because weaving fabric. Now he does it without a blueprint. He does a piece of fabric about this long and maybe a square about this big, give or take. And he does it from memory. Whatever pattern he wants to make that day, he knows what pattern he's doing. It's not in the blueprint. And he's the last of 32 because nobody wants to follow in that footsteps. It's not just the income. It's that why do something so tedious in a dusty, sunlit underground workshop? You spend there for a couple hundred years when you can do something much easier.
Exactly.
Right.
It's amazing that you mentioned the bazaar, because in Baghdad, in central Baghdad, we have also a market called Souk Safafir, and this is where they make the same pots. I'm blacking out. The copper pots, yes, exactly. So when I was in my teens, when I used to go there with my father, I used to hear the sound before I get to and now it's silent because there are no one doing this job again. It's all machines or it's all roboted.
Wow.
Yeah.
So the advent of the internet has died off traditional ways of connection or even jobs.
It's not only the internet, but the way the global market is working right now, and who can make the stuff. So before, and since you cannot import these kind of things, you have to make them at home. But now, since you can find them cheap online, or just go to China and bring whatever you want, then this is what killed most of the traditional industries.
So there is, as Sia pointed out, a double-edged sword of having access to all of these different cultural perspectives and influences, and also in what you're saying, which is the ability to get something that isn't made for a really long time or in some traditional method at a lower cost, and it may not be benefiting your specific culture or even your region because it's coming from outside of the country. Yeah.
And before, these kind of artwork, or however you want to call them, these were used actually in our homes in Baghdad or in Iran. But now we look at them as just like traditional artwork,
like an antique,
antiques and stuff like that. So we don't use them anymore. So that's also.
They're decorative. I have a bunch of these old copper stuff in my apartment.
I bought some from Baghdad in 2019, and for my surprise, it was marked "Made in China."
Another thing that I thought was really interesting, because both of you had, 1 foot here and 1 foot in your own country. I was curious to know if you could, I know it's multifaceted and really hard, but if you could pick 3 words that would describe your culture,
Let's start with yes.
You're saying that so you can think of your 3 words, right?
No, I already thought of mine, so because I knew she was going to.
I don't know. I'd say. I mean, I'd honestly say I'll probably change my mind after I say these 3 words. But if I had to answer now, I'd probably say complex for one, because I think on at face value, a lot of people, again, being that we're fed by the media, we've seen certain stuff the past 30, 40 years, and ignore the 4,000 years that led up to that. I say complex because we forget when there's cultural or political differences between 2 countries that you also have to focus as Iran, not as some of the bad ways it's portrayed in the media. I'm not saying it's right or wrong, it's portrayed that way. I'm just saying not as that, but see it as one of the birthplaces of like mathematics and the first monotheistic religion in the world, and saffron and Persian cats and Persian rugs and caviar and all these other things. It's like, how about all these contributions? So complex, definitely. Because it's complex even from city to city, province to province when you're in a country. The other one that I would say would be welcoming. And again, that kind of ties in with the first thing, because you have people that feel like when they're visiting, especially as the borders are opening back up and everything else, and COVID isn't quite waning, but there was a while where there was more tourism come back to Iran. Right before I left this time, I've been back for a couple months to the States, that I was seeing a lot of European tourists and a lot of Australian tourists and Southeast Asian tourists, Chinese and Korean and other stuff. And everybody that goes to Iran, if you look on any review, I can tell you 99 times out of 100, if not 100 times out of 100, they talk about how open and welcoming the Iranians were. Because a lot of those, again, the younger generation too, want to show you that, hey, this is who we are, And I'd say the third one, God, it could go in any direction, but if I had to say the third one, I mean, there's so many things, but me being who I am, I would just say food. Where's with the cuisine here? And this I think this may hold true for Iraq and a lot of places in the Middle East. Where is here, especially the past couple of decades, let's say there's been a big farm to table and locavore movement here and organic and things like that. Over there, you have all that. The cuisine is seasonal and regional, but it happens organically. It doesn't happen by design. It's just the way it is. When you're in a certain place at a certain time. And when I go to Caspian, to our villa, if I'm there in the summer, I'm eating a certain kind of fish and certain veggies. And if I'm there in the winter, I'm eating a different fish and different veggies. That's what you eat. You can still get mangoes in the winter there, and kiwis and tomatoes when you're not supposed to, You have hot houses, you have imports, you have the same things. But the cuisine there is spectacular. Wow. So, despite the best of intentions, I can never manage to lose weight when I go back to Now, I do want to end that on one note, though. I was telling you my background being, into wine and the food service and everything else. Especially the past decade and a half, I see all these allergies that happen here, which, again, it's not because we don't have the technology to detect them, but it happens a lot less there. You don't have gluten allergies as much. You don't have this. Tehran's a bustling city of, depending on who you ask, between 15 and 18 million people. I still go to the bakery every day at 7, 8 p.m. I still see the same people in my local bakery, and each bakery makes one kind of bread. One type like a thin bread called lavash or sangak or barbari, the thicker, fluffy bread, So the bakery only makes one, and they actually have a permit to pick that one. The oven can't be set up for different breads. These are all traditional big ovens. But basically, you're still finding time to do that. I was trying to explain the concept of fast food to my friends. We have fast food restaurants in Tehran, but I was trying to explain the concept of fast food to a couple of my cousins and their friends, people who hadn't traveled outside of Europe. And we have like double-decker 8-lane highways, 2 international airports, the newest metro system in the metropolitan area. Still, the concept of fast food, as I was describing, was baffling them. They were like, what do you mean you pull up to the first window and you pay and they have your food ready? I was like, because it's ready. Like, what do you mean it's ready? Why is it ready? You can get a hamburger in Tehran, they'll cook it for you. There's less food waste, it's fresher. So to explain fast food, there's still some things that there's, it falls apart. But yeah, that's the 3. since
Yeah, fast food in Iraq or Iran means that you don't have to be at home,
Yeah.
because they will literally cook it in front of you. So you can have it fresh, and they
Yeah.
prepare it like the night before,
Yeah.
and that's it. Nothing is frozen.
No, wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
If I want to describe my culture, I have almost the same words as you did. I can say that it's friendly, which is something that very few people know about the culture in Iraq. They think that Iraq is a hotbed for violence and terrorism and so on, but they don't know that the people there are so friendly and they're so welcoming, especially to foreigners. Hospitable. Hospitality is part of the Arabian tribes' traditions. In the Arabian tribes' traditions, you can go to any tribe, knock on any tribesman door, go inside, eat, drink, sleep for 3 days before he would ask you, what's your need? And this is still happening in countries like in the Gulf states, in Qatar or in the UAE or in Saudi
Oman,
Arabia
yeah.
and Oman. So this is one of the traditions. The other word that I can use is colorful, because the people of Iraq are made out of Arabs and Kurds and Turkmens and Armenians and Assyrians, and there's Sunni, there's Shiites, there's Christians, there's Muslims, there's Yazidis, so you can find these so many colors living with this one country that's called Iraq. And they've been living in harmony for not only for decades, but maybe for thousands of years. And all of the conflict that we hear about in the media, this just happened recently, and it's happened because of outside influences that divided the one people into groups, fighting groups basically, and led to this all bloodshed. We all hear about Sunnis and Shiites in Iraq, but I never heard of any Sunnis and Shiites conflicts before 2003. There were none. Maybe like 200-300 years ago, maybe 500 years ago, there was a small fight that happened, but this doesn't count. It's not an entire population fighting and killing each other. So whatever we hear from the media about the culture in the Middle East is mostly exaggerated and mostly focusing on the negative side, not on the positive side. And this is a problem.
I would trust you when you say that, since you have a background in journalism. So it leads me to ask, like, with your background in journalism, do you feel like you were able to have an influence or perhaps able to provide context on things that were happening? Do you see your role in what you did as your journalist background?
Well, when I started working for the media, I was still learning, and I didn't know anything about journalism or about war reporting. And I was always listening to the kind of questions the journalists are asking, and I'm interpreting. And I asked them, what exactly do you want to know? And they said, we want to know why. And this is the first question that you need to ask if you are interviewing someone or you're trying to investigate something. You have to know the reason behind it. So I started asking this question whenever something happens. Why? Why is this happening? What's the reason? Who's behind it? And so on. Just to give me a sense of how it came to be and where it's going. So I also learned that we're not telling the people everything. For example, I remember once there was an explosion in central Baghdad, and I took my camera, and it was a car bomb, and I spent about 20 minutes trying to get a good angle to show the body of the car bomber, which was fully burned and still inside the car. And then I filed these pictures to France, to Paris, and having in mind that they will use it to show the French people about what's really happening in Baghdad. But I was surprised the next day that they never used it. And when I asked why, they said it was too hard for the eye to see. And I said, but it wasn't too hard for our eyes to see, because we're seeing this every day, and the people have to know or to experience the same things that we're experiencing, so they would understand the severity of the war. We have to tell them, and they never used it. So this told me that people outside the country know very little about what's going on, know very little about us, the people who live in that country. And maybe it's my job to start educating them. And this is why at Elon University, I talk a lot about the Middle East, I talk a lot about Iraq. I'm teaching a capstone right now called Iraq History, Culture, and Art. And it discusses Iraq since the beginning of history until this day. Just to give them a sense about where is this country, what is this country, and why the United States was involved in this country for this long. And I'm always surprised about how little people know about it. One of the other things that I've experienced, and it was in 2008, I was asked to give a speech about Iraq, and I was thinking about using some visual aids. So I went to a library in Chapel Hill, and I asked the owner if they have any maps of Iraq, and he said no. And this was 2008, this was 5 years after the invasion, and I thought that maybe now people wants to know more about this country, so they have some stuff about it. And I said, any maps about the Middle East? And he said, no. Any books about Mesopotamia or about Iraq? And he said, sorry. But we have some books about Egypt. People like these yellow shiny things.
Wow.
He basically summarized 7,000 years of history of Egypt in 3 words: yellow shiny things.
Wow.
So this means that we need to to speak more, to educate people more, and even if we talk to a limited number of people, but they will also spread the word about what's going on in these countries.
You know, it's funny you should say that, because it was almost as if you were reading my mind with a couple of these last things that you were saying, because I was thinking and running through my head about the similarities and differences between our cultures and countries, and one of the glaring omissions is the treasure trove of architectural sites that Iraq and Iran have, and especially Iraq, because of the conflicts that are happening, has had less tourism than even Iran, which hasn't had that much tourism. And then you brought it full circle about Egypt, and that was the next thing I was thinking of, because not to take away anything from the beauty of the pyramids and Luxor and Memphis and the new sites they're still discovering, but people know that. And in Iran, people may know Persepolis, but when you tell them that there's so many things that are older than that, the oldest ziggurat in the world, Chogazambil, or anything else, and I don't want to start listing them, because then there's a list for you, but the point of it is all these places that they don't know, and I think, the least that anybody who believes and is proud of the richness of the tapestry of their culture and the people of it, I think it's not just like, something that maybe you should consider doing. I think it's everybody's job, like for me at least, it's my responsibility. Maybe not job is not the right word, it's a responsibility. If I'm in a position to be able to share it, then I should do that, because, again, when you think of tourism in the Middle East, everybody knows about Petra and Jordan. Everybody knows about the pyramids, and there are like 5 other things people can name. And then you're going to talk about Rome and Greece and those cultures. And it doesn't mean that those are those don't merit respect and those are not part of the fabric of our world, but it means that there's all this other stuff. And if you just want to, just get off the highway, just get off the beaten path. There's so much more to see out there, Iraq people, what do they know about it? I bet you 9 out of 10 people, the educated people, can't name more than 2 cities in Iraq right now. And this is even just speaking strictly in terms of the conflict. Look at how involved we were there. Everybody here knows a family who has a veteran in it or something. They can't name anything except for that. Heck, if you ask them if Kandahar's in Afghanistan or Pakistan or Iraq, they can't tell you that.
Of course.
So.
You said, you mentioned the word complex about your culture. I can say the same thing about my culture as well. You talked about 4,000 years of history that nobody knows about or know very little about. In Iraq, we're talking 7,000 years. We're talking the cradle of all civilizations. We're talking where humanity started, basically. But when we ask people about how much they know, and this is something that also bothers me, like we tend to teach our children in schools about Greek and about Rome and about other cultures, but never the Middle East. And when you ask them, how much do you know about Mesopotamia, for example, they say, well, it was mentioned briefly in our books in high school, but that's it, nothing. So there should be some change in this. We should try and start to teach our children about these kind of things.
That leads me to kind of what I see both of you are doing in your work, which is informing people, and to Sia's point, the responsibility of sharing your culture and talking and taking time to do a panel where you're talking about your culture and influence in it. Do you find that you did that in your work, both of you, for your art? Is that a personal thing?
Well, I'm trying. Unfortunately, when 2003 happened, I stopped making art. I was asked by several of my colleagues and students about the reason why, and I said, we usually reflect our feelings through our art. And right now, all I feel is the death and the violence that's surrounding me. And the Iraqis are seeing enough. I don't want to add more to their miseries. So that's why I stopped for a long time to make art. But then in 2008, when I visited the United States, UNC Chapel Hill offered me a studio. And they said, maybe you want to do some art? And I said, sure. And so I started sculpting again, but then I realized that everything that I'm doing is reflecting what I've experienced in the last 5 or 6 years living in a war zone. It was women crying, it was elder women. I'm sorry, this is just nannies or grandmoms trying to take care of their grandchildren who lost their parents in an explosion and stuff like that. But again, I was also given the chance by Elon University to make a statue that still stands at Elon in front of Art West building. It's called Civilization. And this statue, I'm showing a woman who's trying to reach up to the sky, and there are several hands coming out of the ground trying to pull her down. Some of these hands are holding either weapons or knives or whips or maybe a cross or a bead. And these represent the old traditions like religion or tribal traditions or terrorism or whatever. In Arabic, the word civilization is called habara, and habara in Arabic is feminine. So if I try to show habara or civilization in a statue, it has to be a woman. But it also shows the Iraqi women who fought for many decades under the dictatorship of Saddam Hussein and the leaders before him to win more and more rights and be able to take their parts in society. Lost everything after 2003 in the age that was supposed to be the age of democracy. So this is also one other thing that I try to show to the people here in the United States, how people in Iraq are living their lives and how it has changed because of the invasion.
Yeah.
Have you never surprised by the fact that a lot of folks, again, I don't mean to generalize, but just a lot of folks from all walks of life, especially in the Western countries, you know, in the US and Europe and Australia and everything else, see the Middle East as one entity. Middle East is one thing, and even Africa is one thing, you know, China is one thing, you know, it's things that are like, you know, unless it is not an Anglo-Saxon, it's all one thing. They know the difference between France and Italy, you know, or the difference between Germany and Spain, but Middle East is all one thing. You know, it's a bunch of people, they're all wearing veils, it's one thing. So what I've run into is this handful, because I'm in the beginning of my journey. I'm in the infancy in this path that I've chosen. So in these past 4 or 5 years, any exhibition that happens, and the subject matter is different in every one of them. And even when it is announced and advertised as such that these photos are from Iran, and it brings a smile on my face because people are like, well, this is Iran too, and this is also Iran, and this is also Iran. It's like, yeah, well, and I don't mean it to be dismissive of folks, like, well, what did you think it was going to be? But it's like, because I'm fascinated when I see these things, like, oh my God, this country has so many things. But to think that, well, it should all be this one thing, this idea that I have in my head. And so to me, it's like, where did the idea, not just for Iran, Iraq, but the whole thing where the Middle East is one thing, Africa is one thing, where does that come from? Is it lack of education? Is it lack of exposure? Is it turning a blind eye intentionally,
I think
to a certain extent? So what is it that makes us that way?
I think it's a combination of all of these things. I met people here in North Carolina who never left the States. Not the United States, but North Carolina. They never traveled anywhere else, and they get most of their information from radio or TV. So this is what they know. And when we talk about regions like Africa or the Middle East, and since they never been there, they never visited, and they hear only negative and bad things about it, who wants to learn, to know more about a violent place like Iraq or like Iran or like Syria? So it's only death. That's it. They never learned about the history of these countries. They never learned about the people of these countries and how these countries have changed over time. Tehran, for example, before 1979, wasn't it the Paris of the East?
Yeah, I mean that title. And it's funny you should bring that up because there's a note to that too. But Lebanon, Beirut is also called the
Paris of the East. Yeah, exactly.
But not to stray too far from what you're saying, it's always funny to me when we always equate somewhere else with the Western equivalent, or an Eastern equivalent of a Western site. I have a friend of mine who, a new friend. I met her when I was traveling through Iran this past time. But she is a very bright woman, very, very intelligent, very, very. And also very cultured and well traveled. She speaks a bunch of languages. She was educated abroad, but she is Iranian. And we met in this small port town called Bandar Kong. It's one of the oldest. Bandar, the word B-A-N-D-A-R, means port. So if that precedes any Iranian name, that means it's a port city.
Yeah.
Bandar Abbas is the biggest one that we know of on the Persian Gulf Coast, which is close to petrochemical stuff and everything. Bandar Kong used to be the most important port on the Persian Gulf Coast, and now it's not because there's bigger ports that are, the oil industry and everything else. But this place has been there for 1,000 years, and it's this beautiful picture, postcard picture town with these Sunni majority, so all of the mosques have one minaret instead of two, and the men wear these long, flowing white robes, and it's beautiful. Well, she had found out about this place. I found out about it because another person said, don't go back to Hormuz Island, and I keep going back to, said, go here. She had found out about it when she was in Kenya, and they had told her, go there, it's like the Santorini of Iran. So, and I'm not saying Santorini is not beautiful. What I'm saying, well, why are we saying that? Why aren't we saying Santorini is like the Bandar Kong of Greece? That never comes up in any context, not in Iran, definitely not abroad. So we always have this comparison of, hey, this looks like, we would say Kharija. It's like Kharija is foreign or foreign land. It's like Kharija. When we see something beautiful, even as Iranians, I'm guilty of it. It's like, man, this is like somewhere else because it's un-Iranian. Where it is uniquely Iranian, what I'm looking at.
This is because these names were all made by foreigners, like Europeans or Americans, like the Middle East, for example. Who named it the Middle East?
And from what perspective was it named?
It was
I think that's kind of what you're pointing out.
Yeah.
Sorry, if I made it concise.
No.
An admiral and a geostrategist, an American who never been to the Middle East, and he was looking at the map of the Persian Gulf, and advising the British that they should control the Persian Gulf so they can provide protection to their ships that are heading to India. And in his article that he wrote in 1902, he used the name the Middle East, and this is where it came from.
We're living in a country named after an Italian tourist right now.
Yeah.
Medical Vespucci.
Exactly.
You know, that'll open up a whole.
The Fertile Crescent in Mesopotamia. A British Egyptologist was looking at the map of the Middle East and trying to show the green area in the region. This is where the Tigris and the Euphrates are, and the River of Jordan, and also the Nile River. And he drew a line around it, and he was looking at it, and it looks like a crescent, but it's upside down. So he named it the Fertile Crescent. And even in the Middle East, in our countries like now, we use the word al-hilal al-khasib, which literally translates to the Fertile Crescent. We adopted the same term. Most of these were made not by people who live in that region, but by outsiders who came in and looked at it and said, "Oh, this looks like a crescent."
We just call the Red Cross the Red Crescent.
Exactly.
Hilal Ahmad.
Al-hilal al-ahmar. Yeah. So. When I mentioned the Paris of the East, this is not something that an Iranian used, but someone from Europe maybe.
Well, I'm not opposed to it if it makes somebody more comfortable. You know, it's like visit this because this is something you can relate to.
But my point was that before 1979, it was a total different Iran. Just like in Iraq, back in the 50s, during the monarchy, when it was the British style that is showing in Iraq, and then came the military who killed the royal family and turned Iraq into a republic and brought the Soviet model to Iraq, and then came Saddam Hussein who brought his revolutionary ideals and changed Iraq into something else. And now, after the invasion, it turned into something that I don't know how to describe. It's so mixed, it's so complicated, and unfortunately so ugly. And this is because Iraq right now is ruled by mostly militias, by political parties, and it's just like the post-Soviet Union republics that became so corrupt and so chaotic. So. Anyways, these cultures change with time, and because of the political situations, because of outside interference, and so on. And we need to keep updating ourselves about how it used to be and why it came to be this way, and what's happening, and how is this going to influence us. When I ask my students about the Middle East, why do you think we focus a lot on the Middle East? Why is it so important? Do you think that it has a direct effect on your life here? And they said, so we don't think so. Why are we so interested in the Middle East? And I said, well, let's remember the 1973 oil crisis. A bunch of Arab countries decided to boycott the United States, not by closing the tap and ending all oil exports, but by reducing the oil export by 5% every month. The United States economy, the strongest economy in the world, took only 15 days to collapse. It changed the lives of millions of Americans. So anything that happens around the globe, and especially today with the new technology and the communication means, is going to affect our lives one way or another. So we have to keep learning, we have to keep ourselves informed.
I want to be conscious of the time, but I did have one other question, and I feel like you may have kind of answered that in your own way. It's just, what is one or even two things that you want from someone to take away from your work?
I was at a talk a couple of days ago, and then shortly before I came here, I was with some patrons, and they were asking a couple of similar things. It's funny that this theme has popped up recently more and more and more. I guess not that odd, because we're talking about the photos and everything, and they're asking questions about it. But I never, not having a formal background in art and not having gone to school for anything, that doesn't mean that I don't appreciate the technique that goes into it, the exposure drawing and things like that. But I find myself beyond, the light and the shutter speed, this and that, I find myself trying to capture a mood when I do it. So through my lens, I'm trying to capture the feeling that something is giving me more than the actual thing that I'm seeing. So I'm not talking about retouching something, but I want to convey, I want to transport whoever's seeing what I'm putting on the wall. I want that person to be transported to that same place, not just physically, but in time. I want them to as much as they can, within the confines of a two-dimensional piece of work. The smell, the taste, the sounds, I want them to imagine all of that. All of our imaginations are different, but I'm trying to take you into that place. And then when you add the small depth of perhaps, if I'm present at that time, of telling the story of how that came about, I'm trying to bring you to somewhere else that you may not yourself be able to experience, or may not have experienced prior to that. Hopefully you'll be able to on your own terms, on your own time. But I'm trying to take you somewhere that you might not otherwise get to see or experience.
I have to say that although I come from Iraq, which is a neighboring country to Iraq and to Iran, and we share a lot through our culture, but through your pictures, I've learned a lot about Iran, and I hope that one day I can visit and enjoy looking at these places.
You got a place to stay, so.
Which is great, and whenever you want to come to Iraq, you'll find a place to stay as well.
Absolutely.